بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This week and few more weeks we are going to focus on a concept which is considered to be one of the most important themes in Irfan and philosophy. And the concept itself shared by not only philosophers and urafa, but also any ideology that claims to have come to elevate the status of human being. And that concept is, from their point of view, what makes a human being most perfect example of that ideology, and call it the universal prototype, whatever we use. But from an at least Islamic point of view and a spiritual point of view, the universal person or universal man is a concept that refers to a person who has reached the highest degree of spiritual and moral perfection. Although the term appeared, Al-Insan al-Kamil, appeared with Ibn Arabi, but the concept or the description of broad description of this universal individual did exist and is visible if we look at the number of ahadith and tradition, particularly in Nahj al-Balagha, where Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullah wassalamu alayhi in various sermons uses verbs to explain the whole concept of the most perfect individual, most perfect human being. They may not use Al-Insan al-Kamil. Amir al-Mu'mineen in Nahj al-Balagha may not use Al-Insan al-Kamil, but if we look at the formal verbalization of what it is about this unique individual, we see that it fits with the broad concept that we defined just now, that it refers to the individual that has reached the highest degree of moral and spiritual perfection. Now, the reason why we need to discuss this, but there are few things that we need to discuss before we get into the theme of our conversation. Number one, if we look at the literature, verses in the Holy Quran and ahadith, we come to the understanding, even if we go back to Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the creation of human being, in essence, humans have been created as a composite reality, that they have soul as well as body. And since body is something that it has a relative reality, I don't want to get into the debate of what is real, what is abstract. That's something different. But let's, for the time of being, for the sake of our argument, we say that body has some kind of a reality outside. And soul also has a reality. How much attention we give to one at the expense of the other defines the parameters and the overall view of Islam regarding whether we are materialistically inclined or spiritually inclined. And that by itself, we have to go again, the other phase that, or the other theme that I want to discuss is that when we look at the verses or Islam in total, on the most external level, Islam is a religion that tells people what to do and not to do, right and wrong, and halal and haram, which these kind of concepts fall within the umbrella of Sharia. Sharia is the one that defines what we should do, what we shouldn't do, what is halal, what is haram, what is permissible, what is not permissible, etc. Also, on a deeper level, Islam as a religion commands people how to understand the world and themselves, which is the exercise of mind and intellect. And our Quran repeatedly, in a number of verses, says that on the Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to punish those and send them for punishment, those that Allah granted them the power of intellect and they did not use it. And we have repeated verses in the Holy Quran that why don't they think, why don't they reflect? أَفَلَا تَعْلَمُونَ أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ أَفَلَا تَتَفَكَّرُونَ. So this corresponds, since it is corresponding to human mind, and normally themes such as related to God, prophets, angels, scriptures are dealt with under this category. Call it the philosophical component of Islam. And at both philosophy and kalam are two disciplines that focus on this particular issue. There is a third, on the most deepest level. Islam is a religion that teaches people how to transform themselves, and so that they may come into harmony with the ground of all beings. And here human perfection is needed. It's nothing to do with just the use of intellect or the basic sharia and halal and haram. Purification of the soul and nearness to God. These are the themes that we normally debate in this context, which is considered the heart of the religion. And this is the domain of irfan and mysticism. So because of that, because the fact that we are human beings as a composite reality, and that there is the soul part that we must address, and Quran says قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. Those who purify the soul will succeed on the Day of Judgment, and those who corrupt the soul will fail on the Day of Judgment. So this notion of purification is something that we can cite it in the Holy Quran in number of verses. Now, these two concepts, particularly the issue of the spiritual component, is we can use it as a segue into our discussion for today. I have chosen two books authored by two different individuals. One is from Marhum Hassanzadeh Amuli, which the book itself is called Al-Insan al-Kamil dar Nahjul Balagha. It's still not translated. Insan al-Kamil, and I'll explain why it hasn't been translated in a minute. Insan al-Kamil dar Nahjul Balagha, which is purely extremely dense, huge amount of philosophy and irfan is used in it, and reference to a number of books that he uses from Urafa, Irfan al-Nadari, the theoretical irfan, books from such as Futuhat Makkiyya, Ibn Arabi, Misbah al-Uns, Ibn Fanari, and Fusus al-Hakam, Ibn Arabi, and so on, few others. Because this book was authored for the student who attended Marhum Amuli's lecture on Irfan and Tasawwuf and mysticism, it is context orientated and makes it very difficult to translate for ordinary people unless you are ready to add footnote and endnote that far exceeds the number of pages that you have as a text. Occasionally it happens that you will use 2 or 3 lines of the book, and then you have to spend the rest of the page footnote adding, trying to explain, particularly for people that have no basic understanding of the fact. And this leads me to, I mean, I need to mention it, I have mentioned it before, books that are written, authored in, say, Persian language or Arabic language, and then translated in one of the languages, whether it's French, whether it's English or Spanish and so on. People, native speakers of English, French or Spanish or German, they will find it very difficult to comprehend and understand what the author is trying to say. Pure translation is not enough for them. Why? Because those basic assumptions that the author had when they compiled the book or authored the book does not exist in the the new context that we are trying to translate the book. And it happened many years ago when I was in Canada representing Ayatullah Sistani's office, and people used to come, and there was an Iraqi brother who translated few of the books from Iran into French, and we would give these books to people. Only a week later they would come back and they would complain that they really did not understand. Native French did not understand what the author was trying to say, because those basic assumptions that the author had in mind, such as books from Marhum Mutahhari and others, they don't exist anymore. So the new audience does not have that background that existed in say, Iran, Iraq, or somewhere else, and that makes it very difficult for them to understand. That itself is kind of, it underscores, and when we go to Marhum Amuli's book, Insan al-Kamil dar Nahj al-Balagha, the universal man or the universal humans in Nahj al-Balagha, because of the huge assumption, philosophical as well as the spiritual and so on, that Allama Amuli makes in authoring the book when he was lecturing to the students, it makes it very difficult now to translate, unless you, as I said, footnote and endnote, so that people read these, or even before they start reading the chapter, some kind of introduction to the chapter, that they have to read it before they start to make some kind of idea or comprehend what the chapter is talking about. This book, Marhum Amuli divides it into sections. Number 1 starts with little bit about Mu'jizat Qawli and Fi'li, which I've never heard this discussion addressed by any other scholar. I stand to be corrected if somebody else before him has used this, but certainly he's the one that presents this. He says miracles can be divided into 2 categories. Fi'l, this was a miracle that happens, materializes on action outside. Musa crosses the Red Sea. Isa resurrects the dead, and few other things. Or during the life of the Holy Prophet, Shaq al-Qamar, when the Qamar and the moon is divided. Or the flying of the tree to the Holy Prophet. These are what we call active miracles that are context related, and they are specific to time. once that period is over, is that they are not universal. You have to talk about them as if they are an historical events of the past. And then he says, al-mu'jiza al-qawli, any of unique miracles that Ahlul Bayt, Amir al-Mu'mineen, the Holy Prophet, and so on, they have exceeded the standard of the time and delivered some kind of miracle, verbal miracle, literal miracle. They are the ones that stand the test of time for eternity. So he divides that and says that Nahjul Balagha, if we look at it, falls within this category of the Mu'jizat al-Qawli, that stands until the end of time. And the next chapter after this, Marhum Amuli spends huge amount of time trying to prove that even before Marhum Sayyid Radhi, that the compiler of Nahjul Balagha in his time began to compile all these sermons, there were a number of sources available for the sermons of the Nahjul Balagha to exist. So it's not as if something that Nahjul Balagha was pulled out of a hat by Marhum Sayyid Radhi. There are other sources which he calls it Isnad of Nahjul Balagha, what can be used to prove the chains of narration even before that. Then he moves into the intellectual themes that are addressed in Nahjul Balagha. Then comes to Al-Insan al-Kamil in Nahjul Balagha. That's now the theme that we want to present, inshallah, when we try to address that. And he says that there are 104 sermons and short sayings that that Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullah salam alayhi in Nahjul Balagha addresses the theme of the universal human being, or the most perfect examples. He lists around 70 of them within his book, but he claims that there are 104. And then he uses the conclusion that he reaches from that chapter to move towards the Holy Prophet and Ahlul Bayt and Amir al-Mu'mineen to be the most vivid example of Al-Insan al-Kamil. These are the ones. And then he gives the characteristics of the Insan al-Kamil and the fact that Insan al-Kamil, they are needed on earth as Hujjatullah, the proof of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that if any time or era there is no Hujjah and no proof of Allah on earth, call it the Khalifa, the vicegerents of Allah on earth, then the earth is going to crumble. According to a hadith that says that if earth is devoid of the presence of Khalifatullah, then the whole thing is going to come to an end. Now, because of his unique characteristics and expertise, he uses a number of books in this regard: Futuhat, Misbah al-Uns, Fusus, Tamheed al-Qawaid, as well as Ayat and Quran, Riwayat, from various sources to support his argument. And if you look at the name of these books, it becomes very clear that they are very well-known books in what we call theoretical Urfan that have been written by well-known Urafa and mystical figures that are, even today you will be pushed to find out somebody who understands them well and can teach them well. Very few available. Marhum Amuli was one of them. Marhum Tabatabai was another. Even Marhum Mutahhari has got a number of commentaries on this, but I haven't seen his any commentary about Ibn Arabi or something. He mentions it in various themes that he addresses. When it comes to Ibn Arabi, gives a background, particularly in his book about Irfan, that when it comes to various Urafa of different era, when it comes to, I believe, the 7th century Ibn Arabi, gives some background history about it. All scholars or Urafa that came after Ibn Arabi, they are indebted to Ibn Arabi for his detailed and complex explanation of the theoretical Irfan. Not the practical Irfan, the theoretical Irfan. Rumi and the rest that came after him, they are indebted to him. Now we come to Marhum Shaheed Mutahhari. Marhum Shaheed Mutahhari's book is totally different from Marhum Amuli. Shaheed Mutahhari's books are compilation of a number of lectures that he gave during Ramadan of 1974, I believe, in Tehran, in 2 mosques. And primarily for students of university, that they did not have that basic intense understanding of Irfan and philosophy that the student of Marhum Amuli had when he wrote the book or gave the lecture, and then those lectures were transformed into or compiled into a book. This book is a compilation of those lectures for the month of Ramadan. And he starts with the first theme that we talked about, and that concept of the composite nature of human being, the ruh and body. That there is a soul and there is a body that we have to understand, and based on that relationship, the dynamic between soul and body, we can define from an Islamic point of view a person which is remember the books we read from Qalb al-Salim from Marhum Das Ghaib, Qalb, the heart which is sick, and the heart which is purified. He takes that theme and puts it in the context of the soul. The soul could be either sick or dead, or the soul can be purified. And so Ruh as-Salim and Ruh the diseased. He starts with that theme. And the same manner, he reminds the reader that in the same manner that we have ailment in the body, there are, because of the composite nature of human reality, there are ailment in the soul and the heart. And for the perfection, or that universal figure to exist, all characteristics, both in the context of soul and in the context of the body, all characteristics must be balanced. The development of these characteristics must be balanced. So you can't spend too much time on one and not paying attention to the other. And he would use the human body and physical exercise. If you go and put too much exercise on the bicep and increase the size of the bicep, while other muscles in the body is not developed, it doesn't show, it's not a normal action. The same thing goes for the soul. So, and because of this sickness and the composite nature, Marhum Mutahhari addresses another theme, that human being and humanity are two different things. A person can be human but not devoid of humanity. So because you are physically human being doesn't mean that you are you gain that human natureness that we want. You are born as a human being, but humanity is something that we need to become. You have to go through the process. And then he walks into the theme of Al-Insan al-Kamil from what we call the intellectual as well as the spiritual level. And how various schools of thoughts have given their understanding about what it means to be Al-Insan al-Kamil, or universal universal figure. The philosopher's understanding is different from Urafa's understanding. Philosopher's understanding is for a person that has developed the mind to the point where he or she understands the reality as it is, and comprehensively is aware of what is going on. While the Urafa and mysticals, this worldly understanding is nothing. What you need to pay attention to the spiritual level and how close you are to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how you are able to detach yourself from the physical reality and get close to Allah. If we want to bring some hadith that Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullah salamu alayhi says that ibadah and worship and submission to the command of Allah are on 3 levels. There are those who submit to the command of Allah for the sake of, he says, like tujjar businessmen, an exchange would take place. I will not commit sin here for the hope that on the day of judgment Allah would give me something. And others, they are afraid of fire and punishment, and they say that we will not do it so that I will not be punished. But for Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullah salamu alayhi says that no, I found you deserving to be worshipped, so I worship you. That's a different kind of level. So here Marhum Mutahhari starts the discussion about Al-Insan al-Kamil from Al-Aql and Irfan, and explains how each of these categories and supporters of categories define Al-Insan al-Kamil, and they move forward, and he criticizes, or at least discusses their point of view, and any weaknesses or limitation of scope or anything else he addresses. Today's lecture is primarily an intro into the discussion. I strongly recommend the book that I sent you last night, the name of it, and Sister Zahia was kind enough to send you the link. The first chapter is needed for our discussion next week, because the first chapter lays down the foundation for what he's trying to project in the book as Al-Insan al-Kamil. Leaving other issues aside, but at least the concept of Insan al-Kamil is something that we need to understand. For those who want to look at it, to read it in English, the link is there. But for the Iranian brothers in Insan al-Kamil, the book itself is available online, and you can either download it or read it in Farsi. I think it's probably, there might be other languages that have been translated. So let us stop here and then answer questions. Then next week, please go ahead and read the book. The first chapter, spend some time reading it, so that you have basic understanding of what I'm going to talk about, in the light of what Marhum Mutahhari tries to unpack about the Insan al-Kamil. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.